We're live, and everyone
We are
goes
live.
silent.
Well, thank you all for joining. This was definitely something we spent a lot of time working to set up for you, an interview with Tom Kalinske, former CEO of Sega of America. Jared, I'll go ahead and let you start us off. You really were the person that got this ball rolling, so go ahead and get us started here while we wait for Tom to join us.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nick. So, like Nick said, thank you all for joining us. This is for me personally, and I think I can speak for everyone else here. This is one of my bucket list moments that's about to happen here. I have always wanted to have a frank conversation with Tom, and he really impacted me on a personal and professional level, just because he wasn't your typical executive. He always sort of took what couldn't be done and somehow made it possible. And I've studied in business. I'm trying very hard myself to get to that like executive level, and I always found it absolutely, like amazing what this guy was able to do and have, not just with Sega, but his pre-Sega work. If you don't know much about Tom, he actually started off his career, at least his executive career, in Mattel, where he essentially relaunched the Barbie line for Mattel, Hot Wheels, and he was part of the Masters of the Universe toy line, which at the time, again, it was deemed that it was impossible to beat Star Wars, because back at that time period, Star Wars was, monopolizing the toy market, and yet, here comes Masters of the Universe, and it actually beat Star Wars for 2 to 3 years. So for me professionally, I always wanted to just talk a little bit about some of the business aspects, and being able to actually set this up and have Tom join us was such an honor. And I thought, who better to talk about the Saturn than you guys?
And
We
we're really
on. Yeah.
Thank you. We're happy to be on.
Dave, would you tell the audience a little bit about us, kind of who we are as one of the founders of Shiro?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're just folks in the community. Back in 2017, Pat and I started communicating with each other and talking about how it would be amazing if we could start a podcast centered around the Sega Saturn, because there was really nothing focused on it at the time. The Dreamcast gets mad love, and it has a huge community built around it. Of course, the Mega Drive, the Genesis, has, a huge community built around it. But the Saturn really didn't have a whole lot going on, at least in the US, So, but there are several of us that exist that are like, really excited and enthusiastic about this console, and really want to bring that love and knowledge about it to everyone, and share our memories. So in 2017, we got together with Kay Kona, A Murder of Crows, and we started the Sega Saturn Shiro podcast. And it's really just snowballed from there, and we've done streams and we've done articles and news, and we brought Peter in, who's been a great writer for articles on our blog / website, SegaSaturnShiro.com. And then Nick and Ben brought them in for like the video portion of stuff, and they've done amazing work with us. And so, yeah, we're just really excited to be a part of the community and to continue to spread that Saturn love.
Yeah, for sure, Dave. I am super happy to be part of Shiro. We've done it for 3 years now, and actually coming up on 4. And here's to another 1,000 years of Shiro dominance, right?
Yeah, and I admit that before we existed, I was watching Project COE. I was watching Jared's videos for like the last decade. He would do, I'm a huge fan of the US long box format, and I have an extensive collection, and, so his videos were right up my alley. So I was really, touched and honored that he asked us to come be a part of this. So very, very much.
Yes. Thank you for joining us.
You're quite welcome. And currently, just to let everyone know, Tom's trying to access the panel here. So we'll hopefully be able to figure out our little technical difficulties here. But yeah, thanks Dave, for aging me here. That's just fantastic. But yeah, I would think it was one of the first people on YouTube to start going, talking about what it was like to be a Saturn fan in 1996, 97, and 98. And I remember at the time when I first started, people were like, "What is the Saturn?" And I always thought that was so interesting that people didn't know what the Saturn was. So many people thought it went from the Sega Genesis right to the Dreamcast.
Mhm.
And so, I look at it like if I was able to sort of educate a couple of people on what the Saturn was, mission accomplished.
Certainly did a good job at it. You reviewed quite a few of them too. It looks like Tom Kalinske has joined. Tom is in the chat. Greetings, Tom. How are you? Oh, looks like you are on mute.
You're muted, Tom.
There should be a button.
Yeah, I got
there you
it.
go. You got it.
Yeah. It took me a while to get this thing to work. I had to log into Google. I forgot my Google password. I had to go try 15 different passwords. I had to use my backup. I think Zoom works better.
There have been many platforms that we've all gotten used to, especially in the COVID era. But this is the one that we're using today, and we appreciate you figuring that out and jumping in, and especially appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to chat with us about your time with Sega and your other business adventures back in the 90s. So we certainly appreciate it. Right now we're just align everything in the stream, so that way your box is bigger than ours, to put it in late.
Okay, well, let's go.
All right. Well, Tom, thank you so much. Like Nick said, this for me personally, this is I already told the panel, but this is a check mark on my bucket list. Always wanted to have the opportunity to speak with you. You were quite the inspiration to me, both professionally and personally. So just give you a quick backdrop of who we are. So Project COE, believe it or not, is actually COE stands for Council of Elders, which was from Masters of the Universe, believe it or not.
Oh my gosh. Yes, of course.
And so, so like I said, you've been influencing me in one way or another for literally my whole life. And so I started up the site. My goodness, probably
There
there it is.
Nearby.
I'll send you my address. You can shoot that over to me. Started a video game site about 12 years ago, 15 years ago. Now it's been so long. Huge Sega fan. Followed.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's
right.
my fault. It just crashed on me trying to do all this stuff.
No, that's all right.
So yeah, after I do.
I thought you had a good computer, Pat.
I did. It's stuff's happening. OBS just decided it didn't want to work.
Can't ever trust computers. They'll get you.
Goodness, we were on a good roll there. Now we gotta.
Thanks again for joining us, Tom. Really, thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for rolling with the punches.
my pleasure.
Yeah.
Who
All
else
right.
wants
Looks like-
to introduce themselves while we're waiting?
We should be back live. We should be back live.
Yeah, I can confirm that folks are seeing us live, so that's
It
wonderful.
says the broadcast has not started.
Oh.
It's showing live for me.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's continue.
Yeah, so if we're back, I think we're good. We apologize. We had some technical difficulties. The streaming software crashed on us. That's basically what happened. So we're getting things back up here, and then once everything's laid out the way we had it before, we'll be able to keep going. Appreciate you all for your patience. And more importantly, Tom, we appreciate you for your patience through this.
Oh, no. I understand these issues happen all the time because they happen to me all the time, too.
Right
Would
on.
one of you from Shiro, since we are live, they can hear us, would one of you like to introduce Shiro?
Sure. Yeah, so I know I gave a little bit of an introduction, and I think most of that made it on.
Oh, did it? Okay, well.
Not 100% sure, but just in case, we're a Sega Saturn fan website / podcast. We do a lot of research and reviews on the console and its games. Been at it for a little more than 3 years. I'm a recent member. Perhaps, Dave, you could go ahead and tell us a little bit more about what Shiro is for Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Just so you know, guys, it does say the broadcast has not started still on my end. But I will. Yeah. So Shiro is it's a podcast. Just 100% focused on the Sega Saturn, which was an interesting and
Yes,
story part
it's,
of.
it looks like it's not broadcasting. I don't know what happened when I refreshed it.
Yeah, I don't.
guys, I think
I'm-
we're good. I think we are good because I'm getting messages from people saying that we're
Okay.
good.
All right, that's good. All right, sorry about that.
That means we are good.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, we back in 2017, I was just saying before, we got together and we decided to put together a podcast about the Sega Saturn, because there had been a lot of information out there for the Genesis, Mega Drive, and even the Dreamcast, which came after the Saturn, but not a whole lot of information about the Saturn. And it is a very interesting part of Sega's history. Be it in the US or in Japan or in Europe, there was a lot going on with it. Lots of story to tell, and we're kind of coming around to that part in I guess nostalgia history, where the people that grew up with it are now old enough to want to dive back into it, and maybe even let other people know about it, so that new people can come to the console for the first time and get to know its games and understand some of the things that was going on internally at Sega at the time.
All right. So now we can actually start the panel and start asking a million questions. So Tom, just to orientate you a little bit and get you sort of up to speed on what we're going to do, we're going to start with the pre-Sega sort of era. This is just for me, just to ask you a couple of questions of your career before you went to Sega. Then we'll touch base with, I'm pretty sure, your favorite memories at Sega with the Genesis and Sonic and all that. And then we're going to transition to the Saturn, because I think the truth is there's just so little information that's out there. And what is out there, I find, is so much like rumors, speculation, and just misinformation, that it would be nice to actually sort of clear the air and just get an idea of sort of like your thoughts on some of the things that went on during that era. So to start, I'm going to make this nice and simple. And I'm just curious, what is your proudest pre-Sega moment in your career?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I hadn't thought about that. A lot of people think it's because we helped revive Barbie back in 1973, long ago. But I would say actually my proudest pre-Sega moment was getting He-Man Masters of the Universe successful, and getting the television show on air and having it run for so many years. And it was a great experience, a great team effort, great people working on that.
Hey guys, it looks like if you're in the panel, it will do it, but it's saying not broadcasting. I'm so sorry, Tom.
Oh,
I'm sorry, Tom.
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
know.
trying to get this sorted out.
Same thing on my end.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah, give me a second. So it looks like if you're in, you're in. If you're not, all right. Sorry about that, guys. I'm so sorry.
is that the little bars at the bottom of the screen?
I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm trying to see if
Yeah, my video like camera actually went out as well, so I can't even show my video anymore.
Are any of you guys able
I'm gonna try to
access
restart. Give me a sec.
Because
Up to Tom.
Yeah.
So
Some people say they
Okay.
can't get in. I'm seeing in the chat.
back
Is
on.
that the little bar?
yeah, so we're gonna just assume we're back on. No more interruptions.
Yeah, sorry about that. We'll have to do what we do. I'm so sorry,
Yeah.
guys. This is on me.
So-
I should. Yeah, everything's just going wonky.
Okay, so let's continue, because I want to make sure we keep to Tom's schedule here. So for those that may have missed it or got cut off, I had asked Tom what your proudest pre-Sega moment was. Now go ahead. No more interruptions, I promise.
Okay, well, as I was saying, I was very proud of what we did in the early 70s, reviving the Barbie brand, and it became, of course, a $1 billion+ business, still is today. But I think my proudest thing was the launch of He-Man Masters of the Universe, and making it a strong brand, and getting the television show up and running, and giving it away free to stations all across America, and in return got some advertising time back that we could either use or we could sell. We actually sold an awful lot of it. We ended up making a profit off of the television show, which we did not expect to be able to do.
And something that always sort of I wanted to ask you with that was I know at the time Star Wars was it, in terms of like
Yes.
male figures. It was dominating the industry, and this is something that you're going to hear at least me say multiple times with respect to your career. Was at the time, and I remember it well, was that no one could do this. No one was going to be able to beat what was being done with Star Wars. And it sort of reminisces like to what everyone was saying with Nintendo at the time. Nintendo's got 90 plus percent market share. It's impossible. No one can do it. And I just wondered, like, as a business leader, what did you do to motivate your people to sort of say, like, well, yes, we can do it? Or was that not even your goal with Masters? Was it just, we want to just make this successful and see what happens?
No, it was very much our goal to equal. Hasbro was our main competitor at the time, and they had bought Kenner and therefore had the Star Wars brand. And in fact, the chairman of Mattel at the time said to me, well, it's nice you're launching this little male action brand called He-Man and Masters of the Universe, but you'll never be as important as Star Wars because you don't have a movie or a TV show and you can't get one. And my response to him was, you want to bet? And and of course I didn't know the television world that well, so I hired a guy named Eddie Smartin who had worked on television broadcasting for years. He was an old Ogilvy and Mather hand, and he really got us together with Group W Westinghouse and Filmation Studio, Lou Scheimer's animation house in Los Angeles. And we put a deal together where Mattel put up $3.5 million and Group W Westinghouse, with all of their stations across the United States, put up $3.5 million. And for $7 million in those days, we ended up doing 65 half-hour episodes of He-Man Masters of the Universe and getting it on air across the U.S. and eventually across the world. And that really helped propel He-Man into becoming an equal to Star Wars, which was something that we'd all hoped for and inspired for. And certainly the creative team at Mattel really had a feeling that this could become very, very important. And they were right.
Terrific. And well, we'll go ahead and dive right now here into the Sega era. We do have a list of questions here, and Patrick, you are first up. Do you need a second to prepare, Patrick? Or are you good to ask?
I should be good. All right, sorry about that, guys. I'm on
That's
the tech
all right.
end, so I'm just
Thank you for doing all this,
managing all the
Patrick. We
videos
appreciate
and trying to not crash again. So, all right, so Sega used a ton of star power to promote the Genesis, such as Joe Montana, Michael Jackson. I was curious what your strategy was to target them and what market you look to reach.
Yeah, oh, sure. Well, it was all part of remember the overall strategy, overriding strategy was, hey, let's leave Nintendo, the young kids business. They own it. They have 95% share of the 9 to 13-year-old business. Let's go after older teens and college age plus males initially. And therefore, it was important to have people like Joe Montana, David Robinson, Tommy Lasorda Baseball, have these characters that were well known by an older audience as part of our gang, if you will. And of course, at one point, Joe Montana football was outselling Madden football, which was really spectacular. And Joe actually, he lives near me. He lived at the time near me here in Northern California, and our kids played together, and he became a friend. And he really, really helped the brand because he was willing to do appearances, to visit retailers. Remember, there was no internet.
Yeah.
So it was an important part of our strategy. And of course, Michael Jackson, the same thing. I mean, he is a huge, huge star, music star, and he loved Sega. And our head of marketing, Al Nielsen, had a very good rapport with Michael Jackson, and visited the Netherland Ranch a number of times.
Yeah, and speaking of Michael Jackson, I was curious. Michael Jackson's collaborators, such as Brad Buxter, even had a hand at composing for Sonic 3, or at least brought on at the time. I was curious how that came about, if you could talk about that.
I seem to recall signing some agreement where we can't talk about what music Michael Jackson provided the Sonic series.
I gotcha. Fair enough.
We will
And-
take the hint.
But yeah, no, all the great collaborators. We definitely thank for bringing them on because I guess seeing that that the cool guys, the people that we were interested back in the day on, it's like, oh, let's check out the system. It's like let's see if this is a cool thing to bring us on, so to make us sort of cool and popular that we're in this pop sort of thing. So that's really cool that you did that.
Yeah, and he was one of a number of people. Remember, we were located here in Redwood City, and our R&D group used to have visitors all the time come in and playing games. They just pop in. The whole Mets baseball team used to pop in
Oh,
when they
jeez.
were coming here to visit and play against the San Francisco Giants. And Michael Jackson would drop in. Joe Montana would drop in. And lots of famous people just came in to play Sega Genesis games while they were being developed, actually. They weren't even released yet.
Oh, geez.
It's a heck of a game party right there. That's awesome. And then kind of talking about the bridge between the Genesis and Saturn, you had the Sega CD and 32X systems, and those two received a lot of critically acclaimed titles, a lot of good software like Sonic CD, Knuckles Chaotix on the 32X, Star Wars Arcade, and Night Trap, which many people know about today.
Oh, nice.
You got Sonic CD still.
Great
That's
game.
amazing. You're mentioning things that just happen to be new here.
That's awesome. You just got a shelf of
We
them.
set this up, but we didn't. I actually just grabbed this the other day and had it on my desk here, reminiscing about it.
Oh, that's terrific. It's probably worth a pretty penny, but I'm sure you wouldn't want to be getting rid of that anytime soon. So,
No.
So the Saturn, when it launched, as you know, it launched without a ton of great or critically acclaimed games. It had Panzer Dragoon, it had Daytona, but it really didn't have a lot when it came out. Do you think many of those games that came out in the 32X and the Sega CD should have been saved for the Saturn, or at the very least ported to the Saturn in some fashion when it launched?
Well, I think I've gone on the record a number of times saying that we were forced in the U.S. to launch earlier than we wanted to. We originally were going to launch in the fall. We were forced to launch immediately in June, and we didn't have enough software. Hell, we didn't even have enough hardware. We couldn't ship enough Saturn hardware to retailers to give an average store 4 to 6 pieces of hardware on their shelf. And believe me, that caused a terrible backlash. I mean, I used to have very good relationships with all of the retailers, but when we couldn't supply the hardware, I had a number of guys who were good friends of mine in the retail world basically swear at me and say they weren't going to support Sega any longer because we launched, but we couldn't launch properly without enough hardware, and then certainly we did not have enough or the right software, enough games, enough good games to support it, and so it kind of doomed us to fail with Saturn from the beginning because of those mistakes.
And talking about the software decisions, of course, some of those titles that were only on 32X, only on Sega CD, and of course, a number of titles that were in Japan and in Europe, but not in North America throughout the lifespan of the Saturn. Were those decisions sort of out of the control of Sega of America? Was that something that came down from your higher ups at Sega of Japan? Were you guys trying to get more of those games here in North America?
Yeah, it was a very strange time for me. I had been given pretty much a free hand for years and years to build Sega and build Genesis and to some degree help Mega Drive in Europe. And then all of a sudden with the Saturn decisions, they didn't listen any longer, I guess is the way to put it kindly. And so a lot of those decisions from Japan were the wrong decisions, and we desperately needed more and better software, and we didn't get it for a long time.
Wow.
That's actually a really good segue you did, Tom, into my question. So that's perfect. So you set it up, and you have gone on record many times talking about basically it's generally understood that the Saturn was caught up in the middle of disagreements and differences in philosophy between SOA and SOJ. You were very vocal, and even now, about not wanting to launch the Saturn early, yet they forced your hand. And that action seemed to have ripple effects on many of the aspects of its time on the market. And so if we were to, this is what I don't know, and this is what I would like to know, if we were to step back taking into account the majority U.S. market share that you fought for during the Genesis era, and the fact that you were currently at the time operating at a deficit, with a long game plan, if you'd been allowed the continued freedom that you had with the Genesis, could you walk us through your ideal 5-year plan for launching and supporting the Saturn in the US and competing with the new Sony PlayStation and the yet to come Ultra 64, like over the next 5 years? What was your game plan?
You're taxing my memory.
Yes.
Needless to say, we wanted to our original plan on Saturn was to wait until the fall to launch, when we'd have more hardware and more software available, and we would be able to get more titles developed by ourselves in Redwood City, but also grab more titles from Japan. It was kind of a strange situation. Here we were, as you mentioned, we had a leading share of market in the United States. 55%, and in Japan they never got over, I don't think, 12%, and yet they were forcing the decisions on how to launch this hardware and software range, and that's sort of I guess that sort of sums up the difference in philosophy. You'd think let the market that had the bigger market share make the decisions that had gotten them the bigger market share. But anyway, that's not what happened. So, we would have had enough hardware, obviously, to fill all of the retailers' needs and get adequate shelf space everywhere. And we would have had enough software to have a bigger presence and get some of those titles that did exist in Japan or were about to exist in Japan, get them into the marketplace at the same time. And it would have been the same kind of game plan as we did with Genesis. We would have done very aggressive marketing against our competitors, and that became, of course, Sony, who was our friend up until then, and they were our enemy quickly.
At what time does that transfer over into profit, though? Like, because basically your long game was trying to get as much of the market as you possibly can, because then you have a huge install base to sell software to. Right. And of course, Japan is playing it more conservative. They want cash reserves. They don't want to operate at a deficit. Of course, I was explaining to the other guys, this is coming off of a huge economic recession in the 80s. They're playing things a little bit more conservative and not really understanding that you're just kind of biding your time and trying to build up as much market share as you can in the US to kind of flip the table with Nintendo. And I guess Sony PlayStation comes along and they're like a variable, So at what point does that plan turn into profit, though?
Well, you're talking. We made a hell of a lot of money for Sega Japan off of Genesis and Mega Drive. Remember when I started at Sega? I think the market cap of the Sega Corporation was about $1 billion, and by the mid '90s, it was $7.5 billion. So we'd increased the shareholders' value 7+ times in a 4 or 5 year period of time. So you'd think that the guys in senior management who owned a lot of the stock would have understood that, and would have understood that what we were doing was going to benefit the corporation much more than a 1 year bottom line loss. So anyway, back to your question. I mean, it would have been let's segment the market again. Let's have the proper amount of sports titles. Let's have a proper amount of racing titles. Let's have a proper amount of fighting titles and RPG and strategy games on the Saturn by the fall, and launch in that manner, and doing that year after year after year, and be very aggressive against our friends at Sony, who of course had one of our ex-guys, Steve Race, running marketing there. Oh,
so how did the selection of the titles work coming into the Saturn? Because of the IPs that you selected for the Saturn as compared to the Genesis. With the Genesis, you had a lot of Disney games. You had the Sega sports games that just dominated the market. And you very much like to compete with Nintendo. And that really translated into the growth that you had in the market during the Genesis and the Mega Drive era. But with the IP selection that you had for the Saturn, it was IPs like Blackfire, Gen War, and Bug. What was the selection criteria for that? Because those kind of games that came into North America, they didn't hit well with consumers. What was that selection criteria like?
Well, it wasn't a criteria. We were told what we could have, and in large part, and so we didn't have a choice. I mean, obviously we didn't even have Sonic, for God's sake, initially, and that was a huge mistake. And we didn't have FIFA soccer, and we didn't have Joe Montana football. Imagine what it could look like, and all of the sports games today. I just marvel at how they look on either a PlayStation or an Xbox. But anyway, that wasn't our decision.
So did that all come from Japan, or like did they tell you, hey, produce this software, don't produce this software? Is that basically what that was like?
Basically, that's what happened, yeah.
Wow, okay. Well, Peter, I think you have next bite here, and your mic is muted currently.
Thank you. All right, yeah. So it's been discussed before that you were a big proponent in getting a dedicated video game convention started, which of course became E3. And I was curious what your involvement with E3 has been since then, and your thoughts on the convention as it's grown over the years to become more of a fan expo rather than just an industry.
I think you muted again. But anyway, E3 at the time was a very important step for the industry. You'll recall before E3, we were all running to CES show in Las Vegas in early January. And the reason that I got so annoyed at CES, first of all, they treated the video game industry like dirt. They've had us in the very back of the hall. We were actually behind. You had to walk through the porn section first to get to the video game section.
Wow.
And one year we were actually out the back door in a tent, and I think I've told this story before. And the tent, it was raining in January, and the tent was leaking over our Genesis displays. And I basically said, "That's it. We're never coming back to CES again. We're going to start our own show." We'd had a mini show before that, just for ourselves and retailers. And we held those events in Silverado, and I think we held them in Florida one year. So I knew that the retailers were going to like this, and we got convinced EA and a number of the other software game makers to join with us. And initially, of course, Nintendo is typical. They didn't want to do it initially, but eventually they got on board too when they heard how much the retail world liked the idea of our own video game show. So initially it was very important. It was a very, very important show. We actually did a lot of business there. And of course you got an awful lot of PR out of it because we were right there in Los Angeles, and a lot of media people came over and a lot of celebrities came over. So it was very important initially. I have not kept I haven't gone in a couple of years now, but I've seen it diminish, and I've heard from friends at EA that it's no longer that important. They all have their own private meetings with retailers. Retailers aren't that important anymore. They're doing most of their business online. So I think it's much less important. I know it's much less important today. And it seems like it's almost, they do a little bit for PR purposes, and that's about it. And I think that's the way of a lot of industry shows have gone. They've just become less important as our ability to communicate via like we are right now. We can do the same thing with important influencers in the industry. So I know it's not as important today as it was then.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Gotcha. All right. One thing I was curious about is during the Genesis lifespan, there was a various amount of RPGs that were released at the time on the system. In comparison, many Sega RPGs for both the Sega CD and Saturn, such as stuff like Magic Knight Rayearth and Dragon Force, that have extensive voice acting and span many discs, seem to have been handled by third-party studios such as Working Designs, or just not released in North America at all. I was curious if this had something to do with Sega seeing RPGs as having a limited audience, had poor sales performance in the past, or you guys just didn't have enough bandwidth to support the releases for them.
I thought we did do a number of reasonably good RPGs. So I'm forgetting about this, or it's not striking a chord with my memory cell. You probably should ask Al Nielsen that question. I thought we did release a number of good RPGs, and yes, it's a limited audience, but it also was an older audience, which was something we desired to be stronger with.
Yeah, I just meant in terms like on the Saturn with like some of the some of the ones that were like released earlier but didn't get released earlier were handled by different studios, like working designs of that in that nature.
Yeah, I don't recall.
I gotcha. Fair enough.
For roughly a decade, Sega, Nintendo, they were the only big substantial players in the Western market for video games. And to provide you guys at Sega, you guys had a pretty singular focus in terms of battling for market share, knowing who your real competitors were. But then in the early to mid 90s, it kind of became a little more crowded. You had the Atari coming out with the Jaguar, the 3DO came out. Sony was working on their thing. It became a little more crowded than it had been. Especially as things were transitioning into the 3D world. Young consumers found it difficult to keep track of all the available options on the horizon. And kind of a two-parter question here for you. With all the new competitors coming up, how did you market through all of the noise? And at what point did you guys realize that Sony would be the chief threat after all?
Yeah, well, frankly, we didn't think that Jaguar or 3DO was going to be successful. We had many meetings with Trip Hawkins on 3DO, and we were actually trying to figure out a way of working together. And of course, he was really a bright guy, but that machine was just too expensive. It was just way too expensive to be successful. So we couldn't figure out a way of doing anything together, and therefore it really wasn't that much of a competitor. We had a very good relationship with Sony, as I think has been reported. Olaf Olafsson and I became good friends. He asked us to help his development group in Santa Monica develop video games. And of course, the platform at the time was Sega CD. And we did. So Joe Miller and his guys would go down there and help the Sony guys develop video games. And for the launch of Sega CD, I think right at the beginning, they did 3 and we did 3. And it was a really good relationship. And at some point, we started talking about, instead of being a competitor, joining forces and doing one hardware platform that would be whatever you want to call it, the Sony Sega or the Sega Sony platform. And Olaf liked the idea, and I liked the idea. Olaf's boss, Mickey Shuloff, liked the idea. We went to Japan, and Sony Japan seemed to like the idea. We went to Sega, and Nakayama did not like the idea and said, why should we help Sony become a video game company? So that was the end of that. And at that time, it was very clear that Sony was going to be a major competitor.
So from that point on, when the business deal sort of faded away after Nakayama decided, no thanks, was it pretty much immediately when you guys figured, all right, well, they're going to be our big competition now. They're going to be the other big boy here.
Yeah, you could see it coming. And of course, Microsoft was also starting to make noises and get into the video game business as well. So you could see that one coming too. So it was going to be two major corporations coming into the market very shortly.
So just to clarify, you saw Microsoft coming in all the way back in the mid to early 90s.
I would say it was more of the mid 90s, probably around 95, because they had actually contacted Sega Japan and were interested in somehow working together. They never contacted me, but we heard the stories of them working with others, trying to work with other Japanese companies and working with other chip makers and what have you.
Gotcha. Oh, that's interesting stuff to know about, especially so that was Microsoft. They almost teamed up with Sega. Is that what you were getting at there?
That was the rumor. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Got it. And then do you know more about that or why that sort of faded out?
I really don't, because I was not included in those discussions. They were strictly between Sega Japan and Microsoft. Right. Now, there is one funny part of that, though. When Jim Clark, who was running Silicon Graphics at the time before he launched Netscape, he called me up and he said, hey, you got to come over here to Silicon Graphics. It was very close by, actually. and take a look at this chipset we have. A guy named Jensen Wang has developed it, and we think it's going to be terrific for video games. Jensen Wang, by the way, is the founder of NVIDIA now.
Wow.
I went over there with Joe Miller, and we really liked what the capabilities of this chipset was. And so we asked Sega Japan, Nakayama, and I think Sato-san at the time to come over and take a look at it. And they did. And they said, well, yeah, gee, that's great graphics and great sound and great capabilities, but that chip is too big. And in manufacturing, there's going to be too much waste, and therefore it's going to cost us too much to utilize it. So we can't do it. So I reported that to Jim, and Jim said, well, what the hell do I do now? And I said, well, Jim, there's this other company up north and outside Seattle you might want to talk to. And of course, he went up and that became the chipset for the N64.
Yeah.
Wow. That's nuts.
They shut you down quite a bit.
Yeah. Well.
I don't know if you're the right person to ask about this, but I'll shoot anyway. It seems to me, so at that same time, Sega's the one who pioneered like the 3D graphics. I mean, with Virtua Fighter, with the Model 1 arcade games, it was like the first time as a kid that I ever saw anything like that. So you've got these amazing 3D games, dynamic 3D games in the arcade, like Virtua Fighter and Virtua Racing. And the next obvious step, seems that those will come home on home console, because that was always the thing, trying to get the arcade experience in the home.
Yeah.
And I mean, Sega was the one who pioneered this stuff. So it just seems to me like they were a little caught off guard by Sony's decision to go all in on 3D, like just 3D in the home. Whereas with the way the Saturn architecture was designed, it was almost mostly intended to be 2D and have 3D as like kind of a little bit of like it could do 3D, but by rendering 2D sprites. So how was it that Sega was caught off guard in that way? Like how did they not see that was the future, that what they were already doing in the arcade needed to be done one for one, or as close as you could get it in the home?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I completely agree with you. In fact, I'm sorry I'm not in my basement where I have 200 Sega Genesis games and a whole bunch of Saturn games and a whole bunch of Game Gear games and a whole bunch of CD-ROM games, but I also have a Virtua Fighter arcade machine. And
nice.
I love it. That's such a anyway. Yeah, that seems like it would have been a natural to move that direction onto the next platform. And I think the problem was the architecture of the Saturn made that very difficult. And that was I think that was also, if I, again, in my memory, it's been so long now, but I think that was one of the objections Joe Miller had about the Saturn architecture as well. He had a couple objections. One, I think, was the 3D. You couldn't do 3D that easily. And the second was he really wanted the next hardware platform after Genesis Mega Drive it was the beginning of the internet, and he really wanted good internet connectivity, and that was a big gripe of his. So we didn't do it.
It's kind of that's the thing with Sega, is they're always pioneering they're on the edge of everything new, like the internet, but way before the rest of the the rest of the public is ready for it. So you're basically saying that they were just focusing on maybe a few other little things to try to focus on having it do, rather than just going all in with the 3D.
Yeah, I think that's right. By the way, Joe was the guy who you remember when we did the Sega Channel with Time Warner? And,
oh man, thanks a lot. That was awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it was really terrific. But poor Joe, I thought this was a simple thing to do. What do I know? I'm not a technical guy, and I thought cable box. So we just do a connection to a cable box. Mm-hmm. Joe called me down to the R&D group one day, and he said, "Look at what I have in this room," and there must have been, I don't know, 150 different cable boxes in the room. And he said, every one of these requires a different way of interfacing with it. And you want me to do this? I've got to figure out how to do it with 150 different machines that are not the same in any city. And of course he was right, but he did it. and it was just it was a great effort, and it was again probably obviously before its time to have people playing via a cable system in their home, but it did work, and a lot of people really loved it.
Yes, that's amazing. I think that's one of my favorite things. That one or just the internet connectivity with the Netlink stuff, just so fascinating, especially during that time where nothing was done like it. So it was really cool.
Yeah, Sega really pushed for that each console generation until they got it with PSO on the Dreamcast, and then it was like boom, the market ready for it, and that just took off.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the different ways to play games with different people online was just it's just amazing.
But they were pushing for it since the Genesis, It was like
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, all that said, though, around the time of the Saturn, the internet really was still very nascent, and so a lot of folks, myself included, got a lot of our news about what was going on, in the industry and the different consoles through print media. So journalism, video game journalism, was quite big at the time, and at the time there was just a really huge bias in the media towards the PlayStation, and again, eventually towards the Nintendo 64, and they really didn't look on the Saturn very favorably. Whereas, of course, with the Genesis, it was very different. And I'm just wondering if, at the time, Sega was aware that they weren't exactly being treated super kindly in the press with the Saturn, and if so, what were some of the things that you guys tried to do to combat that?
Yeah, that's a really good observation, and a very strange one, because I thought, certainly during Genesis era, we had great relationships with the print media and the print press, and they were very important to us because, as you say, that's where the players got their information from, and they rated the video games, and it was very important to get a good rating from the printed press. We worked very hard to ensure that, and wined and dined those guys, and I thought we had a very good relationship. So I don't know quite why it all changed. Remember, I left shortly after the launch of Saturn, so I'm not quite sure why that all changed. And was it something that Sega of America did, or was it something that Sega of Japan did to the printed press that changed them to being enemies of Sega? I don't know. We'll have to ask them.
Call them up. Gotcha. In the time of the Saturn, and it was rumored, and I can't stress the word rumor enough, so hoping maybe you'd know something about this to clear things up, but rumored that Sony was nefarious for causing multi-platform Saturn games to come out several months after they were finished, so that the PlayStation port of the game could come out first. So, for example, say there's a game that's set to come out for both consoles, and the developer finishes the Saturn port in January, but the Sony PlayStation port's still being worked on. That needs another 6 months. And Sony would tell the developer, well, don't release the Saturn game yet. Wait until the PlayStation one's done and release it first. My question to you, would Sony pressure third parties into delaying Saturn ports to make their console appear to be ahead and getting games first before Saturn?
Oh, sure. Sure. I heard the same rumors. I don't have any facts to back it up, but I'm sure that they would have done that to have an advantage over us.
So you believe it probably happened then?
I believe it happened. Yeah. We'll have to ask the third-party developers that question.
We would, yes. That would definitely be a good question to them. I appreciate you sort of giving your input on that, though. Definitely something I've been wondering about. Did that frustrate you at all, like seeing that happen?
Well, of course it's frustrating, and it's part of the dirty tricks that went on in the video game battles back then, in the console wars.
Gotcha. Torches, pitchforks, and everything, huh?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ben.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I cut in between there. So in 1999, you told the Wall Street Journal that you believe no one could successfully market the Saturn. Is this solely because of the hardware, which I know you really didn't care for the architecture, or do you think a better library of software and games could have made it competitive?
Oh, sure. It wasn't just the shortage of hardware and the fact I thought it could have been a better system. And that was really Joe Miller's thoughts, not mine, because as I said, I'm not a technical guy. But it was clearly the lack of great great games. If we'd had great games, at least we would have had a fighting chance. But without great games and with the limited amount of hardware we had and pissing off all of the retailers, that was what I meant in that Wall Street Journal article long ago.
Yeah, sure. Okay. And speaking of great games, in late 96, you released the 3 free game pack, which was Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop, and Daytona USA, which are very much great games. They're flagship titles. Similar promotion was done in late 95. Tell us about what went into this bundle decision.
Again, just trying to offer great value and great products, so that we'd have some advantage and consumers would want it. The players would gravitate toward that. I do have I should have brought that up here. I don't have it, and I have that in my basement game collection. But I have those products, and yeah, that was really good to have a combination like that available for the consumer. That was great value for the dollar spent.
Oh, definitely. It was a really good variety. You got to really try out a different type of game selection there.
I even have one of the old retail displays. Now, this isn't a Saturn one, but I have a Genesis retail setup in my basement with a television connected to it, with a automatic changer so you can rotate through. You may remember seeing this at retail. You could rotate through 6 different games and at retail and play each of them in any order you wanted, again, for as long as you wanted, or as long as the retailers would let the player stand in front of their display. But yeah, so that was another little trick we had.
Was that a hard decision to make, though? Like, if we're going back to the 3 free games, often with video games, there's the whole razor and blade style marketing where you try to get the console, you barely make a profit. If anything, you might lose money, but you're trying to sell the software. And here you're giving away 3 flagship titles with a console. So like, what was that like, in the boardroom meetings, was that a difficult decision to make? Did Sega Japan, give you a hard time about it, or did they just say, go ahead and do whatever needs to be done?
Well, it is a difficult decision, as you say. You're giving up a lot of separate profit for if you've been able to successfully sell each of those games on their own. You'd obviously have more profit than just combining them into one product and selling it. So it is a difficult decision, but at the time we really needed to do something. We needed to offer better value and try to get more players onto the system. So yeah.
I know it was a success because I hear plenty of people saying that's how they came to the console, through that 3 game offer. So yeah, I was just surprised that SOJ was like signed off on that, considering they didn't even want you to pack in Sonic into the Genesis.
Well, they didn't want us to do the 3-pack either. So
right.
Some things they let us do, and other things that eventually in the 95, 96, they stopped us from doing an awful lot of stuff.
Gotcha.
I wanted to just to ask. I recently graduated, got my MBA, and believe it or not, but a lot of the tactics that you use from a marketing and business context are actually being taught now, which is really funny to see your name sort of in print there, talking about Sega. And you can tell, I mean, just by talking to you, just to see your body language, you can really tell that you're annoyed by what happened. And I'm curious, all the success that you've had. You mentioned Barbie. I know there was Hot Wheels. There's Masters of the Universe. You come in, you got Genesis. You crush Nintendo at a game that everyone tells you can't be done. What did you do from a leadership standpoint when you come back from your meetings with Japan and you realize, like, you see the writings on the wall? What do you do from a leadership standpoint to sort of motivate your staff? Because it can't just be you. And I can only imagine, like with my teams and stuff like that, the position that you must have been in must have been exceedingly challenging. And I just was curious, just from a leadership standpoint, what did you try to do to motivate the troops to say, we do still have a chance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, I am somewhat aware that in MBA programs around the country, that they are using episodes of Console Wars book or chapters of Console Wars book in their trim. In fact, I have to give a lecture at University of Kentucky, I think next month, via Zoom, and I've done it at Vanderbilt University, and I've done it at University of Arizona, University of Wisconsin. So I know that it is being used, and I'm quite happy about that. I'm frankly surprised. But anyway, to your question, you know, all the things we did in the early days at Sega, I get way too much credit for, because it really was the team of people coming up with, let's do this, let's do that, let's do more aggressive advertising. Yeah, so it was really, you know, it was Al Nielsen and Diane Fornacier and Paul Rio and Joe Miller. And it was this team of people I had that was a very diverse team, a lot of females in senior management positions, which no video game company had back in those days. Ellen Beth Van Buskirk. Anyway, Michaeline Christine Risley, all these great people came up with the ideas that we put together as a strategy, and then I'd go to Japan and fight it out in the boardroom there, saying, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make fun of Nintendo and advertising, and they all practically ran out of the room. We're going to lower the price of the hardware. We're going to put Sonic the Hedgehog in instead of Altered Beast. All of these decisions weren't just mine. These were recommendations that came from the team. So the team was terribly important, and early on, when we were successful and Nakayama said, okay, do what you think is right, the team was very happy and very excited. But later on, in the 95 period of time on, when I'd come back and say, well, this is what we have to do, or I'd get a phone call in the middle of the night, you're going to introduce Saturn in June, not in September. This was tough, because it was tough to communicate to the team, and I would obviously do it and say, well, this is the way it's going to be, and we got to try to do our best that we can. But I started losing people. You know, a number of my key team left before I left, so they saw the writing on the wall, probably before I did. But it was difficult. You know, when you have a strategy that everybody buys into, life is good, and it can be pretty easy. When you don't have a strategy and you're just ordered to do things without really having a strategy, life becomes very hard. And so it was a tough period of time, and that's why I left.
Yeah, and I think it's apparent now in hindsight that really for Saturn could have succeeded quite well under your continued leadership, and you know, it succeeded quite well in Japan.
Yes,
with them doing things their way, but it needed to be one of those split things where there were two different sides of the coin, you know, and we love Saturn despite all of this. You know, we came to it and we've stayed with it despite all of this, and we love the console. We love a lot of the games, but I do think that you had all of this forward momentum that was just continuing to build, and then it just kind of you know, it just stopped dead in its tracks. And you know, they kind of, you know, and I'm not trying to make you out to be a victim, but definitely your hands were tied behind your back to a certain extent, you know,
to a certain degree. Yeah. And
yeah.
I don't feel like a victim. I just feel like, you know, I kind of blame myself. I always say to myself, why couldn't I convince them of some of these things? What did I communicate how did I communicate incorrectly? Why was I not able to let them see the light? You know, and so I do blame myself for not being persuasive enough, I guess. Anyway.
The truth is there were more moving parts at that time, you know. I mean, it wasn't just Sega and Nintendo anymore.
That's true.
And so the market, I mean, to be fair, the entire games industry was changing at that time radically.
Yes.
In terms of what Peter said with the internet and hardware and new competitors entering the market, and it was just like the Wild West.
Yeah, it was a difficult period of time. But I had a great time while I did it. It was a wonderful 6 years, and you know, I learned an awful lot. And I, as you probably know, I mean, I fell in love with what video game technology could do in terms of involving players and having fun and being better than what other alternatives of play were. And I wanted to take that knowledge and apply it to educational curriculum and make educational curriculum as fun and interesting as a video game. I still believe in that, and still in some ways working on that.
Absolutely.
Now, we can't do an interview with you in this current time period without plugging the Console Wars documentary, Tom, which you were featured in quite a bit, released last year. And if people at home want to watch it and learn more about Tom's time in the Genesis era, that is I believe it's on Amazon Prime Video, and I'm sure it's available on other platforms as well.
It's available on CBS All Access for sure. And I wish it were more widely available, frankly.
Gotcha. One thing that we wanted to ask, I think our stream is done just due to time constraints, but while we got you on the line here, Peter, I think this is your last question, just about reflecting on the Saturn then and the Saturn now. So I'll kind of let you take it away, Peter, if you want to go for it.
Well, yeah, during the time of the Saturn, it didn't do super well here in North America, obviously. And I'm sure that a lot of the times when we've had to talk about the Saturn, it's never really been anything overly positive. And so I'm just curious if you had, first of all, any positive memories about the Saturn in that time frame, and how do you feel about it now being such a unique and well-regarded retro console?
You were breaking up a little bit there, at least at my end. Frankly, I'm really happy that you guys are doing this. That you're keeping interest in the Saturn alive, and I frankly wasn't aware there was that big of an audience of people who still loved it. But I guess this whole retro movement in video games is when Blake Harris came to me, what was it, 5 years ago, and said, "Hey, I want to do a book on the time you were at Sega fighting Nintendo and Genesis versus NES and Super NES." I said, "Gee, Blake, there's probably 200 people in the world who care." And he said, "No, you're wrong. There's a huge audience." And he turned out to be right. And I think, again, in what you guys are doing, it's a much bigger audience than I was aware of. So thanks to you. Thanks for keeping the interest up. I'm sorry, that's my phone going off. Now I forgot your question.
Well, I mean, nowadays, there are Saturn games that go for hundreds, some thousands of dollars, sometimes because of how rare they are, but there are even some common Saturn games that fetch more than $100 on eBay. This is a very sought-after retro game console, partially due to its rarity, but it also due to how people who are into retro games really like the look of Saturn games and the types of games that it has to offer.
Yeah.
I mean, reflecting on it now, what's your kind of general reaction to what you experienced in 1995 and seeing now in 2021 this giant amount of people who still like it and hail it as having such a high value, both in the monetary sense and for people who just like the console's library?
Well, it's great to hear, and I guess I should go down in my basement and start offering them on eBay, because God knows I've got everything that we had through through '96 at least.
Yeah, for real. I just spent like $800 on Magic Knight Rayearth a couple months ago, so you'll make some good money.
Oh my gosh!
Actually, sign them first, and then they'll be worth like 10 times as much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Tom,
well, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's it. We just wanted to say thank you so very much. Like I said at the beginning of this really for all of us, this is a bucket list moment, and we actually gained a lot of insight here, and you're very, very, very generous and kind man. Thank you so much for joining us. And I tell you right now, there are a lot of Sega Saturn fans out there, and slowly but surely, I think people are coming to realize sort of exactly what you said at the beginning of this, that, there was potential there. There really, really was.
There's a lot of new fans too. People who missed it the first time around, and now they're realizing the mistake they made.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's great to hear.
So thanks for joining, Tom, and we're going to wrap this up. So thank you all for watching, and go
check out the
console.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Sega.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you very much.